Hey there, listeners. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to all those new grad nurse practitioners and doctor nurses. Congratulations on your achievement. You've earned it, you've worked hard, and you've made it. Also, quick shout out, we are excited here at the 4MPs to announce, drum roll, this is our 25th episode you're about to listen to. So we are just thrilled that you've been listening with us, and we're excited, and we hope you enjoy this next episode.
We are Christina,
Oneida,
Alicia,
Colleen.
Welcome to 4NPs Podcast.
This is a podcast by 4NPs. 4NPs, advanced practice nurses, students, and anyone interested in the medical arts.
That's the number 4 NPS podcast.
if you have a topic you'd like to see covered, please feel free to email us at 4npspodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us through our social media. Welcome back to the 4MPs podcast, where we'll be interviewing Sharon Fisher. Sharon is a dually board-certified nurse practitioner, both in adult primary and psychiatric mental health. She's an entrepreneur at heart and business owner of Nurtured Well, located in Maryland. Sharon specializes in women's and perinatal mental health management, offering compassionate and holistic care through psychotherapy, medication management, and coping skills. Her practice offers in-person and telemedicine platforms to ensure a full range of access to care. Sharon is also an author of a book titled Beyond the Egg Timer, discussing childbearing and fertility over the age of 35. She is also a motivational speaker and posts blogs for her website at Nurtured Well and Psychology Today. We're excited to have you joining us for today's interview, where Sharon shares her journey both personally and professionally.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining us and being willing to share your journey with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I love your guys' podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So why don't you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, so I always say my journey had absolutely no plan to it. It just unfolded. Much like I apologize because I don't remember which one of you it was, but my story actually starts out like one of yours, in which I was an ecology and evolutionary biology major in college.
Colleen.
Is that you, Christina?
Colleen, I think.
Colleen,
right? You were a biology major?
Yeah, both Alicia and I were bio majors.
Oh, okay.
Cool. So I started working as a fisheries biologist regulating the commercial fishing up in Alaska. And after about a year of that, I was like, didn't really want to keep pursuing biology type things. Had always thought about becoming a nurse, but wasn't quite ready for the first time around in college. So I went back to school at that point and got my bachelor's in nursing and became an RN. And then I started out in the cardiac progressive care unit at Johns Hopkins. And they have a fabulous program where they pay for graduate school. So I was like, I should definitely take advantage of this. And I was initially going to pursue nursing education. So I really enjoyed your, I listened to them out of order, but you did an episode with a nurse educator, and I really enjoyed that.
Oh, yeah, she was amazing.
And I was going to pursue that, but we had a team of NPs on our unit, on our service, and one of them strongly recommended that I become a nurse practitioner, because she's like, if you like teaching, you can still do that as an NP, but you can do so much more. Mm-hmm. So I was working, as I said, in cardiac progressive care unit. We had, most of our clients were having cardiac bypass surgery, and I just really wanted to start catching people upstream, better nutrition, better health habits, so they wouldn't need bypass surgery. So I became an ANP, which is primary care adult nurse practitioner. And my first job out of graduate school was starting a wellness program that was embedded in a community psychiatry program. So I was to look at the somatic and physical well-being and health practices of their clients and offer some interventions on site. Because as it's well understood now, people with persistent and serious mental illness suffer at disproportionate rates of things like diabetes and cardiac disease and such. So that was in 2007. I'm trying to do the math. And so I was there and I was doing the physical piece, but I realized I really needed to learn more about the mental health piece, because even though I wasn't doing that care, I was working with people who were extremely ill in that regard. And again, I was at a health system that paid for graduate school. So I said, why don't I just go back and get a postmaster's psychiatric NP? And everybody says you end up switching sides once you do that. And that was very true for me. The psych NP just felt so right and so comfortable.
Okay.
So I continued on in the program I was in for a little bit. And I also started working in the intensive outpatient psych program within the same department. So I was using both. And at the same time, I took a part-time job doing consult liaison work at a different hospital and just got a taste of everything. And then in 2015, I had my first child. And so I stopped working completely for a year. And then when was time to come back to work, we just decided that, having the most flexibility, I didn't need to work part-time. I didn't want to work full-time. I'm sorry. I didn't need or want to work full-time. I really wanted to just keep staying home with my daughter, but my husband was like, oh, you kind of do need to go back to work.
Darn it.
We kind of do need your salary at some point. And so what made the most sense was doing what they call group practice. And that's where you come in as a contractor. And it was an outpatient, kind of just general psych practice. And so I did that for a couple of years. But just there were some things about it that weren't really a great fit for me. But it made sense to keep doing mainly direct patient care because, again, that was the most flexibility and the greatest income potential for the least amount of time, meaning I could be home with the kids. At that point, I had a second child. So it wasn't about, just coming in and making money quickly, but it was about being able to really enjoy my children and having the lifestyle that we wanted. And so I started asking around and looking around and just trying to digging deep into what I should do. And all the roads pointed to opening my own practice. And so in 2018, I launched very, very part-time because I was only working part-time. So this was even more part-time. My practice, Nurtured Well, which exclusively cares for women, women's mental health practice, while I was still working at the group practice. And then in 2020, I left the group practice completely and focused on Nurtured Well. So that's where I am now.
That's amazing. Wow. To go out and do that and just on your own, was it scary to do, or did you find that you had it in you to be able to do it? Like who helped you do that?
Yeah, no. So, it was part of it was scary, but what I kept telling myself is if it fails, it fails. It's not like I can't still be a nurse practitioner. Like there's plenty of work with us out there. And what was nice was I did it in the least overhead possible. So there was the least financial risk. So I sublet a space. This was before telehealth was all the rage. I sublet an office. The master leaseholder wanted to do it month to month anyway. So it was less risk for me and less risk for her in case it wasn't a good fit in her space. And so I didn't have a lot to lose financially if it didn't work out. And I did it. I was actually in the black from the very beginning, which is, a little... mental health practices tend to be within the black in the first year, but within the first month is a little bit unusual. But I just kept the overhead really low.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how did you find your patients? Did you, was that your question?
Yeah. How did you get, did you have a patient load already? Obviously we're seeing a lot of patients. So for a couple years.
Yeah. So some of them, I did not take insurance at the practice that I founded does not take insurance. And the old practice took every insurance and medical assistance. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a ton that were going to follow me over, but I did have a few that followed me over. And then I really just built it up. I only probably had, 3 that followed me over, but I built it up word of mouth. I just networked like crazy. I made it my business to meet every single private practice therapist in the area. Since I do women's mental health, I met every single obstetrician, every single midwife. I just put myself wherever I could. There was a birth fair one year, and I set up a table there. It was
wow.
So whatever I could think of doing, I did.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important, networking. I mean, if you really want your business to grow, right, and to be well established, I think that's an important aspect of any business, and privately especially. Did you find that, do you still find that this is hard? It's still hard to network, or are you ready? Your name is already out there and, it's much easier now, or are you still having to make a huge effort towards that?
So I feel that I'm pretty well established in the community. I think it is, though, an ongoing process. I don't think you can ever get complicit with it because there are always other people coming in. And so what I've done too is, as I've grown in the business, I've learned a lot about marketing. And so I do a lot of search engine optimization on my website is a huge part. I'm starting to do a lot with Google Ads. And I actually just, starting January 1, I hired a marketing firm to do a 3-month run of a Google Ads campaign to see how that works.
Great.
Yeah, but it's an ongoing, it's not as intense, I guess, as it was initially with the networking because my name is out there, but it is ongoing. And it's also like that looking for news sources, right? Because the therapist, not every patient in therapy wants medication.
Right.
And so eventually you run out of people.
Now, I just want to go back a little bit. You said that when you went back to school to get your Psych NP, you felt that that was a great fit. Like, what about it fit you more than being a ANP?
So I think that it was the grayness of everything. Like, I'm a very gray thinker, and that's how psych is. Like, you just don't jump into a diagnosis. It's when done correctly, it really is, I feel like, the most holistic because you're looking at these different dimensions of someone's life. So how does their innate personality mend with the environment they grew up in, both by environment, I both mean their family structure, their family of origin structure, the place that they grew up, what was going on. I mean, I have a patient that grew up in a war-torn country, had to leave in the trunk of a car kind of thing.
Wow.
But even things that aren't that quite so severe, right? How does their physical health or just physical being affect them? How does their mental diagnosed health? I hate mental illness. I hate that word, but their mental, just so we're all on the same page, their mental illness diagnosis factor in. And then I practice from a feminist perspective. And so, what that essentially is saying is that just being a woman in this world is inherently much harder. And that's why it's societal factors that do drive some of our mental health issues. Right. It's very hard to not have anxiety when you're bombarded with messages that the world is not safe for you. And in a lot of ways, it's not safe for us. So there's, and just all of the other inequalities, right? The making, they always say 82 cents to the dollar that we make. It's actually much lower than that. And I'm not going to, it's not what the show is about. I'm not going to go into that, but it's actually for, once you become a mother, the pay inequity is even worse. Which is really interesting and kind of sad. So it's all of those things and I think you factor that into someone's mental well-being when you're giving that care. And I also just think that the being able to be a little bit more flexible with things. I also like specializing. Truth be told, my first job as an ANP, my only job as an ANP, was phenomenal for me because I was not the kind of person that could go into a regular primary care clinic and see 25 people a day and see diabetes, heart failure, tennis elbow, some kind of weird dermatology thing that I would have no idea what it is. It's too fast. It's too much. I just like the pace is a lot better. And I like diving deep. And I think most importantly, I like hearing people's stories. Like I love learning someone's story, and that's what psych is all about.
That's awesome. Did you have any experience at all when you went back to school, or was it all like brand new to you?
It was all brand new. I mean, I did work in a nursing home at one point when I was in undergraduate nursing. I worked in a nursing home, and so there's a bit of the geriatric piece and just caring for people and while they're transitioning. And I did also work on a unit for infants exposed to substance abuse, and so I really enjoyed working with the parents that were engaged in doing a lot of education. And I think there is a bit of just a lot of support in that. But no, I never worked on a psych unit, never worked in the ER. It was really, and I didn't think I was going to become a practicing psych NP. I thought I was going to just learn more.
Right. How long was the additional schooling when you did go back?
It ended up being a really long time.
Yeah.
So part of it is I did it really part-time because I was working and I had gotten married at some point during that period of time. But then they also had I went to an excellent program. I really liked it, but there was some kerfuffle with one class I needed to move forward, ended up not being offered. So then I had to wait a whole other semester and it pushed everything back a year. I think it probably took me 2.5 years, but it shouldn't. The postmaster psych NP shouldn't really take you that long. It was just how things worked out.
Right. So, you talked about as an ANP, seeing so many patients, especially in primary care, it's just one after the other, and there's a variety of mixed comorbidities. Now, with an psych NP, can that happen too? I mean, not the mix of comorbidities, but just being overloaded and bombarded with patient load?
Absolutely. It's a great question because I don't think people think that can happen, but I'm in several different forums with psych NPs, and they talk about having like 20 people a day or having 15-minute medication management follow-ups, which is not long enough for the average patient. You're not going to get, for most people what you need. Right. When I worked in the group practice, I would typically schedule maybe in like, I might have scheduled 20 people in an 8-hour day, but that would have been accounting for like people no showing or canceling the last minute. Like I sort of did that assuming not everyone's going to come up, and I might have had like 15 people, which is more doable.
Definitely. Got it. And that group practice type of setting, did that make it harder too, to have to like, you had to like basically be held to a certain amount of patient load, right? I mean, there was like almost no option.
That's actually, it's a good question, and it leads into why I don't take insurance in my current practice, which is something that I really wrestled with from an ethical standpoint. But yeah, I mean, the practice itself didn't really have a volume of service because I was a contractor and I received a percentage of collections. But just to make my salary, I did have to see a certain amount and just kind of hope that they showed up. And I did have to always schedule a certain amount because I knew. And
So when you say it led to the insurance part, was that why you don't take insurance? Can you explain that a little bit?
So there's several reasons why I don't take insurance. The first was when I started, I had my one daughter. I'm not really good at remembering all of this, but my one daughter was like under the age of 1 or maybe 1. They're 2 years apart. So the other one was like maybe 3 or almost 3. And I only ever had 24 hours a week of childcare at most. So it was a lot of, the older child was in an in-home daycare 3 days a week. So that was pretty set. And my little one from ages 0 to 1 had a nanny who was actually one of my best friends. And it was one of those deals where like I would work like 12 to 8 one day a week. And my husband would be home at 5. So we would only have to have her for 5 hours, and she would show up. And it was just this crazy, like there wasn't a minute to breathe. Yeah. And so I knew if I was going to do this, I had to do it in the way that was the most simple for me. The other part of it was that I could not sit there with no shows. And what happens when you don't take insurance, and don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people who use insurance who are very motivated for their care, absolutely. Sure. But when you take insurance out, you only get people who are super serious and motivated for their care. So the no-show rate in my private practice is like 1%. Maybe, I mean, it's really low. And it's usually like there's some kind of emergency behind it that you find out later. So that was part of it. And then the other part of it was, those were the two initial driving factors. But then the more I started to learn about insurance, because then I started to feel really guilty about it, the more I started to learn about how insurance works, I refused to support that system as a provider because it's totally set up against the provider. And, the whole, I don't know how, I know you guys have dug into this at different points on your show, but essentially when you go through the credentialing process, they do not tell you your rates that you're going to receive until you've finished. Mm-hmm. So to go through that arduous process and then not be told, I need to be told up front because then I'm going to agree to it or not. Right. They can change the rates at any time without telling you, or they have to tell you eventually, but they can change the rates at any time. Well, none of us would take a job if our employer was like, yeah, next month I think I'm going to just start paying you $5 an hour less. I mean, if there's a serious crisis in the company and this is how we have to survive, then it's a discussion and that's different, but it can't just be some sort of arbitrary thing. Mm-hmm. They don't allow you to discuss rates with other providers. So to me, that's anything that's like non-disclosure like that to me is just red flag, mistreating employees. Right. And then lastly, they have 3 months to pay you out. Well, that was one of the problems I had at the group practice. I can't wait 3 months for payment. Mm-hmm. I also can't get into arguments with clients about, clients were arguing about $30 copays. And it's like, I don't have the time for that. Like you're getting a really good care for $30. And then lastly, the clawback issue. Insurance companies years down the road after service is provided can come back and say, you know what, we don't really think you billed adequately, or we don't really think the client actually needed that, or we overpaid you, it was our mistake, and they expect you to pay them back. And it's like, that's not a reasonable system. Like nobody.
That's ridiculous.
That's completely ridiculous. So I'd be happy to take it. I mean, it's ironic because if we ever got to a single payer system in the country, I actually might sign up for that if it is straightforward and if it is fair and equitable. But insurances are not equitable and they're not fair. So that's long answer to your short question, but that was a lot of what drove it.
Yeah. No, that was great explanation.
That's so great. That's a lot of information that I think I know for me, I didn't really know all that. So I just learned a lot right there. Thank you for that. I do have some questions. So what are some of the services that you provide? Are you working on telehealth stuff, or are you just doing face-to-face, or you use both?
So at this point, I do both. I was not doing any telehealth before the pandemic. I went kicking and screaming into it, but now I actually really like it. But I like having my patients back in the office too. So I offer them both. I have very few people want to come in though. It's like, I'm glad I bought the really nice sofa. Nobody wants to come in and use it now, but it's so convenient for them to be in their home or car or wherever.
Oh yeah.
I have a few come in. I have 2 nurse practitioners that work for me, and they are exclusively telehealth. And that's working great for them. And then I just hired a social worker therapist who's going to do part in-person and part telehealth. And mainly when I hired her, I required that because we were getting patients who wanted psychotherapy in person and going elsewhere because we were, I do psychotherapy as well. I was full, and the other people, are telehealth. So yeah, so
that's so great. Sounds like your business is growing, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I just want to back up for a second. So you went for a postmaster's psych NP. Do you end up having a second master's degree with that, or is that just a certification?
So I think it depends on where you went to school. Where I went, University of Maryland, I was offered the opportunity to make it a second master's. I would have had to written a thesis. What I did was, it was a regular psych master's NP program. So most of the people in my cohort did not have a master's. This was not, this was their first master's. There were a few of us that were postmasters. And so they allowed us to do it as a certificate if we wanted, or to do it as a full master's. And I ended up doing the certificate.
It doesn't matter at the end of the day. I mean, I think that, you've gotten what you needed. So
right, to practice. Absolutely.
Yeah, Christina and I have talked about that. I don't know if you're on the same path. Like we kind of toy with the idea of should we go back, but then we were recently just saying like it's another master's degree. It's like so much more. It's just like I don't know if I'm up for that, but I didn't realize there was like a postmaster's certificate, and that is so much more appealing to me personally.
Yeah.
A lot of the schools are offering that now because, there's psych in everything. And as you guys know, like most of psych is delivered in primary care. And so just to have that extra, and I don't care where you went. Once you get the psych NP, you realize you didn't get enough psych in your A and P or F and P to, but since most of it's delivered, there are a lot of NPs that are saying, I just need to know more. I'm going to stay in my primary care clinic, but I need to know more to feel competent at this. And so there are options if you're interested.
I know, Oneida, you've said that a few times. I've heard you say that, you prescribed a lot of psych medications. So it's, it's got to be beneficial to have more of that education.
When I was, because I was in primary care, Sharon, and I was thrown right into psych, prescribing, managing, treat. And I was overwhelmed because I wasn't prepared, and I had to, just get prepared and ask the questions and research and as much as I could. But it was I was apprehensive, initially because I'm like, I'm not really familiar with these medications and combining them and how are they going to affect the patient and side effects. I was, but I had great people around me and I would kind of go to them with my questions and, kind of follow what was already being done. And I felt like going back and getting the education would be ideal, even if you're just going to do primary care, because it's such a big part of care in primary care. But thinking about going back, like Colleen and Christina had mentioned, it is a little daunting, but knowing that there's a certificate program you can kind of cling on to, but that still requires, I think, a year, right?
I think it depends on where you go and how, because you still have to do, I think, 500 clinical hours. So
Right.
I think it depends on, I precept students, so I kind of have to go by that, but I've only had like 3 different schools. So I can tell you what these 3 schools do based on my students. But I think, if there are programs out there. I actually was I taught adjunct for Johns Hopkins program, and that is a year, but it's so intensive. We usually the students really shouldn't work while they're doing it. I think some do, but it would be really tough. But I don't think it would be more than 2 years, assuming you could get those clinicals in.
Yeah.
Now, Sharon, is there a separation? Because sometimes when I was referring patients to behavioral health or, they would come in saying, oh, I'm managed by an NP. She's a psych NP. Sometimes that was only delivering medication management, not necessarily therapy. Is there a separation? Can you do both, right?
So it's in the psych NP scope of practice to do psychotherapy. Now, that doesn't mean that every school doesn't mean that every psych NP should, right? Because some schools, it's a heavy focus. So where I went was actually a CNS, clinical nurse specialist / NP program. They no longer, as you guys know, ANCC doesn't do CNSs anymore, but it was heavy on psychotherapy. And most of the faculty were psychotherapists, nurse psychotherapists. And so we got a lot of it. And by a lot, I mean like several semesters of meeting 3-4 hours a week seminar style to discuss patients, discuss cases, our own personal reflections on them, and just getting the coursework in it. A lot of what I've seen from my students is they'll learn a modality like motivational interviewing or something, which isn't really, it's useful, but that's not, someone wouldn't go to psychotherapy for that. You would use that to maybe help foster some behavior change around something else that they were interested in, right? So I think it just depends on the program. It technically is in the scope of practice. It depends on how much education they're getting in the program. And then of course it's an ongoing, no matter what you get in your program, there has to be a lot of ongoing training and supervision around that. What I've found with NPs psych NPs I meet is that the bulk don't want to do it. They prefer the medication management. And the ones who do want to do it ultimately get more extensive training and that type of thing. So yes and no, I would say. Most places aren't going to hire a psych NP to do psychotherapy, though. And that's something I think people need to be aware of. Just from a revenue generating standpoint, it makes more sense to have them do medication and to have LCPCs or social workers do the psychotherapy.
Right. Where I had come from, we had an organization that we depended on, and it was a collaborative agreement. And they were LCWs, right? And they basically did all the psychotherapy, and then we did the prescribing. Or if they went to a behavioral health provider, then they would take care of everything, both in one. But they were few and far between. So it was just, it was hard.
I have a friend who's a psych NP who specializes in, hi, Mia, if you're listening. She listens to us. She's awesome. And her specialty is PTSD. She works with the military. And she does, I just recently asked her the same question, Oneida. She counsels and prescribes to her patients. So she said that not all psych NPs do that. And I don't know that she has to do that, but she does do that. She said she prefers to handle it that way. So I wonder if that's like an option, or Sharon, maybe you can answer that question, Sharon. Is it an option? Like you can choose to be both?
So yeah, I mean, I think that what I found with a lot of psych NPs, even if they are only staying to the medication point, they will often throw in a bit of like supportive counseling, right? Or doing a bit of mindfulness work, or maybe doing a little bit of like cognitive behavior therapy work, very, very sort of very light, not really digging deep. And then there are, and kind of making longer appointments, like a 30-minute follow-up appointment where they can do a little bit of both. And there are people who do both. I mean, I think it just depends on if your agency is going to support, to do psychotherapy, you really need a 50-minute appointment. And are they going to support you in that when you can see 2 or 3 people in that time?
She's with the VA. So I think she told me she does 30-minute visits.
Yeah.
So she's being supported, but maybe because it is military and she is a specialist in PTSD, and that's, you're going to find a lot of that at the VA. So
Yeah.
maybe that's why. But so it sounds like she must be supported in it, I'm guessing, but it sounds like she is.
Yeah, and I think I'm such a huge advocate of, like, I think you own your degree, not the other way around. So if it's something that an NP really wants, that's what they should pursue, and find an organization that is going to support them in that,
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I have from a business perspective, I have a question. If you're prescribing, like, how do you do that through your own business? So how do you set that up? If I was going to go set up my own business, how would I prescribe through my business? Am I using handwritten pads? Or do you have did you purchase some sort of a software, or how does that work?
So so it's so funny because I have an EMR that you can prescribe through.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had an EMR that you can do the charting and documentation in and prescribing in. There are software that you can buy that is just prescribing. So if you prefer an EMR that doesn't offer that, you can always, I think they have...
Dose Spot is one that the company I work for uses. Dose Spot, I think it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm planking on some other names. So I've always had it in one because I don't want to have to log into a bunch of different things. I actually do have a paper prescription pad, though, because I always feel like you never know when the whole thing's going to fall apart and you need to just write out a prescription. Why not?
It's surprising, though. Like, a lot of my doctors I work with, they don't have prescription pads. And I'm like, how do you not have a prescription pad? Just in case, you need to write a prescription like the old days, So.
That's how I feel, Christina. Yeah. I'm like, I want to be when things fall apart, I want to be ready.
At least have one,
We said on one of our episodes that since you had to pay $888 for your DEA license, that you should get $888 worth of prescription pads since they're free.
Get your money's worth.
I'd like to order 3 billion prescription pads, please.
So then, Sharon,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Christina. Go ahead.
I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. You go. You go.
The other question I have is about insurance so do you have an insurance for your business and then private insurance for yourself also, or are you just covered under your business?
You mean the malpractice?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the business itself has malpractice insurance, and that's what I'm covered under and my employees are covered under. They are free to get their own policy, just like you might have your own policy. But it's an actual malpractice policy for a whole practice, and it covers all of them. I also have general liability insurance that would cover things like somebody comes into the office and trips.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It covers that. And then I also have workman's compensation insurance in case a worker got injured on the job.
Yeah, God forbid, of course. Yeah, but yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you.
And what are all of the services that you offer?
So we offer psychiatric evaluation. Everybody starts with an evaluation. We offer medication follow-up, both 25 and 50-minute options. And we offer psychotherapy. We are going to be doing a retreat in the spring. I'm super excited. I partner up with another business. Yeah, and we're going to do a 2-night, 3-day retreat for women. And then we had a wellness group going that stopped, but I would restart it at some point, an online wellness group just to learn, different coping strategies. Prior to the pandemic, I offered in-house childcare. Because I exclusively see women and about 50% of my population is perinatal. Probably about 70% of my population has children. It's such a barrier for moms to get mental health care. So we had that, which was phenomenal. Obviously had to end it with COVID.
Yeah.
And that's it.
How did that work?
I have a suite with 3 offices. And so the third office is really small. I made that the childcare room.
Wow.
And just brought in my kids' old toys, honestly, and a little kids table. And I actually hired a young woman who worked for my kids' daycare because she already had the background check and everything. I trusted her and I knew her.
Yeah.
And my office was down the street from the daycare, so she would. I actually asked, it was an in-home daycare. And so I asked the owner, can I steal one of your girls? And so it worked out. So she would come in, I would offer it for 4 hours a week, just one morning. And anybody who needed it would be scheduled during that time slot. So Maya would watch the kids. Yeah.
What a great idea.
That's genius. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I never heard of that.
Did you have a background? Did you have a background in business before you did this? You have some great business insights.
Thanks. No, I didn't, but it's so funny because my family's always like, "Oh, you're such an entrepreneur. How did you learn this?"
You are. Totally.
But I was the kid. I can tell you this. I started my first business when I was 10.
What?
It was called, and it was Odd Jobs Will Even Them. I made a flyer. My little friend Priya Chopra, wherever you are, I conned her into doing this with me, and we had a flyer we made called Odd Jobs Will Even Them, and we did mother's helper, gardening, car washing, and like pet sitting or something.
I love it.
And we handed them out in the neighborhood, and I loved it. I loved like selling Girl Scout cookies. I didn't particularly love being a Girl Scout, but I loved going out and selling them. I think at one point I sold like something for my brother's hockey team just because I wanted to go do it.
That's great. That's amazing.
Great. Yeah, I love that too.
So no formal business training, but I think I kind of had the knack for it. And part of what I really love about being a business owner is like, I could never just do one thing all the time. And I think that was part of the issue I was getting into, like, because the first NP job I had out of graduate school, that wellness clinic I was running, I was hired to start it. I was doing like program development, seeing clients, research. I had all these different things I was doing. And so like to go to someplace where you just sat there and saw patient after patient was like, no. And so when you own a business, you're doing all the things. I get to see my patients, but I also get to do marketing, and I get to learn about how to build a website, and I get to learn about how to run a business and develop a business, things like that.
Yeah. I love that stuff too. Yeah, we have a lot in common. I also worked in a fish hatchery in California. I worked for the California Department of Fish and Game for a year at a fish hatchery.
So yeah, that was probably, okay. That's yes. I was through a third party, but it was for the National Marine Fisheries Service. So yep,
that's so funny.
That's awesome.
That's so funny.
So much in common.
Yeah, similar interests.
One day we'll have to talk fish.
Yeah. Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about telehealth? Is there, do you find that you're able to give the same level of care with telehealth as in person?
I actually am. I was very doubtful of this whole thing. I'm telling you, I was such a late adapter that it was like the state was shutting down, and I was like, oh, it'll be fine. And I was like, no, like legally you cannot, you keep doing this. So it's really been an interesting journey, because what I found is it's what you gain is also what you lose. So like seeing people in their natural environment is a huge help. You see how people are living. You see everything from like how noisy is it outside of their apartment, right? How much sunlight does their room get? And then because I work with, moms are a huge part of who I work with, I can often see how well treatment's going because I can see the toddler running and interrupting and how she responds to him. So I love that. I found with my college age patients, they're a lot more open in their own environment. Like they're down with all this technology and stuff. So they're actually more open and forthcoming when they're online. What is lost is the energy in the room for sure. But I feel like it is the same. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it actually works really well, and it expands access to care. Maryland's a pretty big state. I mean, I guess it's smaller than New York, but it's a big state. It's geographically pretty diverse. And also it's like one of the worst traffic areas. So we have clients on the Eastern Shore, which we would not be able to serve otherwise, because at the height of summer, that's where all like the beaches are, Ocean City and all that. At the height of summer, it could take you like 3 hours with traffic to get to where my office is, right? So it expands that. We can see clients up in the mountains. I mean, I think if you were to try to drive coast to boundary in Maryland, east to west, it'd probably be about a 6-hour drive or so. So we can see people all across the state, Southern Maryland. I'm getting people outside of DC, which is only maybe 40 miles, but could easily take 2 hours with traffic. So I just expands access to care tremendously. And then one of the NPs I hired really, she technically could commute in, but it'd be a haul for her. So just being able to hire that kind of talent.
That's great.
Very true. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just back with my questions.
That's okay.
I know we that's my fault. We went a little bit off.
No, I've been like all over the place today.
We have a list of our questions.
You're just so interesting, Sharon. It's just like we want to pick your brain. Get in there.
Well, I have to say, I was on a call with one of my NP friends earlier today, and I'm like, you have to check out this podcast. Not because I'm going to be on it because it's so awesome, but I'm like, you're just going to love their banter. Like, I love who you interview and the questions you ask, but just the banter is so great. You know, it's just really good to see your relationship.
So it's not annoying?
I find it engaging and endearing for sure.
Thank you.
So we'd love to hear more about this book that you co-wrote with another person, correct? It's Beyond the Egg Timer?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for Beyond the Egg Timer, a companion guide for having babies in your mid-30s and older. So my husband and I struggled to conceive our first child. And one of the things that really just irked me so much was people would be like, well, you waited too long. And I'm like, well, I got married when I was 33 and he wanted to wait 6 months, which seemed very reasonable to me. Like, be married for 6 months before we start trying to have a child. And so that put me at 34, but like, just sort of barely 30. I think I got married in March anyway, whatever. Like, I might've been 3 months into being 34 or something. And it's like, and then we started digging in. I started digging into a lot of the research because I'm really, dorky that way. And like 30, at that time, so that child that we ultimately had is now 7. And so this is going back, it took us 3 years to conceive her. So going back probably about 11 years when it's all said and done, right? At that point in time, people were still saying 35 was a fertility cliff. And I started digging into it, and there was no medical accuracy to that. In fact, it had been taken from medieval church records. And so, like, we don't do anything else in medicine based on records from medieval times, as far as I know, right? So why are we shaming women? And at the same time, like, the National Health Service in the UK started a campaign called Get Fertile Britain, which was just a shaming campaign. So it was all this inaccurate information about fertility. And it was also a lot of inaccurate information about why people in general were delaying childbearing. And so my friend Emma, who's a few years older than me, was just a huge source of support during my fertility journey. She had already had her children by then and just was always willing to listen. And she had suffered a couple of miscarriages herself. And so we really kind of understood. And we were celebrating her 40th birthday. And she's like, and she's a public health researcher. She's like, I just wish there was more accurate information out there. I wish there was like a book or something, And so the next day I literally called her and said, Emma, we should write this book. And in retrospect, I think about this now, and she had 2 very young children and was working full time. And I asked her to write a book with me, but we're still friends. It's awesome. Okay. And it took about 5 years to get the book out because we were all doing, other things. And what we ended up doing is we started just interviewing women who had their first child over 35. And so at the time of the interviews, some of those children were infants and some of those children were older teenagers. So we were getting this wide perspective. And it's really, I think of it as a qualitative study because what we started to do is interview people until their stories started repeating, and then we stopped. And then we started drawing out all the themes of what was being said in these narratives. And so we were able to come up with 3 themes as to why women were delaying childbearing. And one was because they were indecisive about having children to begin with. 2 was infertility. So people like me who started under 35, but just took so long. Mm-hmm. And then 3, just life, in due time, life. So someone who might have gotten married in their 20s realized the marriage wasn't a great fit, got divorced, and then it took time to meet somebody else who was having financial problems, somebody else who wasn't meeting their significant other and really had to decide, am I going to be a single parent or what am I going to do? So just in due time. And so none of that is career crazy, cat lady, none of, right? Because that's not, we wanted to really break that stereotype. So what we did is the book is divided into these 3 themes, and we have our own stories weaved throughout it as well. And we have these first-person narratives of these just very diverse women to really help normalize the story, to help normalize the situation for people, because you can really see yourself in one of them. And then we pair it with just scientific data and then coping advice, emotional coping advice. Because what we found, we're both kind of geeky, and we had between us read probably every fertility book out there, and they fell into 2 categories, either how to get pregnant or one person's story. And although we found all that interesting, we were like, we don't want to write that book because one person's story doesn't speak to you maybe. And then also there isn't, at the end of the day, you can stand on your head and eat all the pineapple and make love on red sheets and all those different things, or take Clomid and do IVF. But at the end of the day, it's really quite miraculous to have a living child. And there isn't one thing to do. You can be well informed, but there isn't one thing. And we didn't want to tell people just do this thing. We wanted to just tell people, here's how to, cope while you're going through the practice. And at the end of the day, we were really, really, it's one thing to give up if you decide it's just not the right choice for you, right? That's totally different. We didn't want people giving up on having children because they didn't feel there was hope or because they didn't have the information. Right. And that's something we really wanted to offer. It does. It happens all the time. And it's so sad to me. Like a woman I met, I'm friends with now, but I met her at a party and she was like, she knew about me. I was really open about my journey. And she's like, yeah, I guess I'm just too old. And I'm like, well, how old are you? And she was like 36. And then I'm like, well, how old's your husband? And she's 52. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, it might be your husband. That's much more likely than you. But get checked out. Oh, we can't get checked out. We can't afford it. Well, in the state of Maryland, all health insurances are mandated to provide at least a fertility evaluation and screening. So you can afford it, right? Like you can, like that's, you may not be able to afford fertility treatment. Now in Maryland, it is mandated that insurances pay for fertility treatment. At that point in time, it wasn't. But you could at least find out, right? Because maybe they're going to tell you you have uterine polyps. Right. And then that gets removed because it's a medical issue insurance pays for, but that was what was preventing the fertility, right? So there's so many workarounds. Or maybe you find out your husband is totally sterile. Okay, well then we're either not going to have children or we're going to use a sperm donor. Right.
Or there's other options. Right?
There's other options. Like just get checked out so you're not sitting there wondering. So that was really, and so we, it's a passion project for sure. It's a passion project. And so we ended up blogging on Psychology Today, and I blog on my Nurtured Well site. But we just really like helping women. And when my younger daughter was turning 1, Emma finally said, we need to get this book published, else it won't happen. We've been working on this forever. So that's when we did the final push to get it out. Sorry, I just went on and on there.
No, that was a great
I love the story.
description. Yeah.
Me too. It's always amazing to me what people will say, what one person will say. And usually I find it's women who will say it to other women, which is amazing. That somebody would say to you, oh, you waited too long. Like, how dare you say that to somebody? Like, it's just so, it's insensitive, and it's so many things there's so many things wrong with somebody saying that to you. I had my children, I have 3 children, and 2 of my children I had when I was a little bit older, and people said stuff to me all the time. It was amazing. And I would just look at them like, you don't know me. How dare you say anything to me? Like, what? I didn't ask for your opinion. Right. I'm carrying a baby. Like, doesn't matter how old I am. None of your business.
Right. It's such a sacred topic. And I've become like a big birth geek after this too. My mother was so funny. She's like, oh my God, you're going to go back and become a midwife, aren't you? And I'm like, no. I just love talking about birth. It's like, how many degrees can you get? I'm sorry, it's funny. I just realized how dark it's getting in my room. But, that's an aside your listeners don't have to.
I had a midwife say to me, my 3rd child, I was 39 when I had her, not 49, 39 when I had her. And my midwife, who you would not expect, right? I wanted to be a midwife when I went to nursing school. That's what I wanted to do. Oh, wow. And there's a million reasons why I didn't go that direction. But a midwife said to me, after I had ended up with a C-section because my daughter was breech, and they didn't want to risk delivering her breech because I was 39 years old, and they felt I was a geriatric mom, which is a horrible, heinous term. And they were kind of like on me about everything. And so I had a C-section, and she looked at me, she looked at my stitches, and she's like, oh, you're healing well. And she goes, you're done now, right? A midwife said that.
Oh my gosh.
I think the midwife was being holistic. Like, I was, and my husband was so mad. So my husband will say stuff for shock value, so don't be offended by this statement, because if you know him, you'll know he did mean it in the way it could come out. But he said to her, well, now that you installed a zipper on my wife, we're thinking we'll have a couple more.
Oh, good for him.
He was so mad. He would look at her like, how dare you? Like, That's none of your business. And how dare you
Right.
say that? Yeah.
Right.
Interesting, right? But it triggered me when you said that somebody said to you, you waited to like, really? It's not building another woman up. It's just tearing
Right.
Yeah.
something down. Why would you say that to somebody? Yeah.
It's horrible. Yeah, and I'm stunned at your experience is just, and especially it's such a vulnerable, like right after having a baby, you're so vulnerable. But at any point, somebody, so it's interesting too, because one thing we found in our work was that the women who were waiting because they felt uncertain, or they were certain, but they felt like one woman was completing a PhD and just didn't feel like she could do both. There are the people one thing we found about all the women, I think they were all very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Not conscientious about motherhood, but like
thoughtful about it? Or
incredibly contemplative about it and really valued motherhood. Like the one who delayed having children because she was doing her PhD, really thoughtful about it. Like really just, I want to be the best parent I can and provide the best. And I'm like, don't we want all children to be born in those circumstances? Like really thoughtful, really intentional about being a parent versus, all right, I guess you go to college, get married and have kids. And then like, well, how well are you raising, if you're, so I think that really it's much opposite, I think, than what people think. But yeah, it's fascinating, just the misinformation. And I also, it's kind of led into, I do the psych part, but I'm such an advocate for informed birth without fear, because I think that was something else I encountered, my experiences going through infertility, prior to going through infertility, I was one of these people where it was like, okay, can the anesthesiologist meet me in the parking lot? Can I be knocked out for this? Right? Like I wanted to be a mother my whole life. But like I was just like, whatever with the birth. I'm not into all this. But like it made me want a totally no intervention birth. And I really got geeked out on learning about birth, learning about how to get through labor. And I support women in whatever kind of birth they want. I have patients who come in who've had maybe a C-section, right, for like a transverse or a breech or something. And then they're like, they offered me a VBAC, but I just want to have the C-section. I'm like, go for it. You know what you want, do it, right? Like I'm totally supportive. All birth is natural, right? But like I got really honed into that and it became super important to me. And we were able to do hypnobirthing. And my older daughter was just born. She just had her birthday earlier this week. And it was just, thanks. I mean, she was literally born with James Taylor playing. The midwife was sitting at the edge of the bed just sipping tea. It was just beautiful. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was serene. And so I get really offended when people turn birth into this like sitcom thing where the mother is screaming, all these stupid things. Yeah. It's like birth doesn't have to look like that, Right. And like my second child, I was induced. And again, like I didn't want an epidural. They honored that. You are sort of tethered to the bed there, but I was able to get up and be on the birthing ball. And again, have the music playing and
yeah, that's so great.
Yeah,
definitely. Everybody's experience is so personal. So.
That's the thing, Krista. It's personal. And I think honoring that and giving women and men too, like the space for it. It's so important, and people just jump in with their opinions and everything. And it's like, no, honor it, give space.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And you have to, it's something that you as a woman are going through. Not yourself. If you may have your partner there, you may not. Culturally, you may not have your partner there, or maybe because you don't want to, or maybe you don't have a partner to be there. But it is. Right. It's a personal thing that you're going through yourself. So nobody should really have any opinion. Right. Or if they have an opinion, they should just keep it to themselves. Like nobody has. It's like you do you. I'm going to do me. So.
Exactly. Before I ask the last question, any other questions?
I have a lot more, but we don't.
Go for it. Oh no, I don't want to end. Go.
No. I feel like we could just talk all day. It's a pleasure talking to you. You're so accomplished, and I think that you're really showing that nurse practitioners can do anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we can. We absolutely can. That would be my encouragement to anyone is you own your degree, use it how you want. Don't let anyone else ever tell you how big you can get. You decide that.
Absolutely. And usually we close out the interview with asking, what do you wish that you had known as a nursing student or a new nurse practitioner starting out that you know now?
So I think I wish I had taken more time to explore other avenues in nursing before going to graduate school. And it was a little bit, I had this opportunity to go for free, so I wanted to jump on that, and it's give or take. But I think like really just exploring the options and getting to know yourself really well before you make any jumps. So I see people going into nursing saying, okay, I'm going to do the accelerated bachelor's and I'm going to go right into the DNP program. And I'm like, unless if you know yourself really well, that's not a great idea.
Right.
So get to know yourself. And I think that, and just, everything's going to work out. You don't need to worry. I remember my first nursing job just being like, so nervous about everything. And it's like their support. They're not going to let you kill anyone. Like, it's going to work out.
Yeah, you just have to be open and reach out and ask for help. I think that's one of the big issues. People don't know how to ask for help.
Yeah.
That's important. And where can people find you? What's your website? All that stuff.
Great. So my website is nurtured-well.com. NURTURED-WELL.com. And then I'm also on Instagram, and the handle is at beyond the underscore thing. Is that what it is? A little line at the bottom. Beyond underscore the underscore egg underscore timer. Beyond the egg timer, but with the underscore is the Instagram handle. And the main blog, I have a blog on psychology today called Beyond the Egg Timer. It has not been updated in a while, but there might be things people find interesting there. And then I blog on the Nurtured Well site. That's the blog I actually really keep up and is more general women's health, women's wellness, things that would interest women, And then the book is available on Amazon, Beyond the Egg Timer, a companion guide for having babies in your mid-30s and older. It's on Amazon.com.
That's so great. And we'll put all that in our show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you so much for having me. It's just been great meeting you. And I just keep doing your work. I love it. It's so helpful for the profession.
Oh, you
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
Sharon.
you. Yeah, it's wonderful meeting you. Thank you for everything that you do for women out there. It's great. We need it.
Very inspirational.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Stay safe.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Sharon.
Thank you for listening.
4 in Peace Podcast has a Facebook group called Nurse Business, a community created to support one another and enjoy positive ideas and thoughts. We hope you'll join us. In addition to that, for a little fun, follow us on TikTok.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel to see some clips of our live interviews and listen to past episodes. Feel free to email us with ideas for episodes, comments about our podcast, to recommend an interviewee, or if you'd like to be interviewed yourself at 4npspodcast@gmail.com. That's the number 4npspodcast@gmail.com.
Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 4NPs Podcast. That's the number 4NPS Podcast. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, and go to our website at 4npspodcast.com for episode transcripts, resources, and more information about us. Thank you all for listening today. Please join us next time for Sandy Casese. She's a clinical nurse specialist and president and chief operating officer of Hospice of Orange and Sullivan Counties in New York. Sandy is passionate about hospice and palliative care, equal access, patient rights, and end-of-life care. She's also heavily involved in legislation as well as the American Cancer Society. Please join us next time.
The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be used in substitute for professional care by a medical provider. The information in this podcast does not represent medical or other professional advice or services. The thoughts and opinions presented on the 4NPs podcast are of the hosts and guests and do not represent those of their employers.